On today's episode, we are talking about a proposal to forgive or write off the student loans of medical students, healthcare students in general, nurses, physios. So obviously this episode is going to be interesting to you if you have a student loan. But if you don't have a student loan, I think you really should listen to this as well to appreciate just how much student loan and student debts have changed over the last few years, because it's getting pretty ugly, to be honest with you. And to do this, I am delighted to be joined by everyone's favourite doctor turned accountant. Wait, accountant turned doctor. Not Ed, of course, but Dr. Syra Asher.
Hi, thanks for having me. Lovely to be back.
Absolutely, yeah. How have you been?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, I'm really interested to find out what your thoughts are on this student loan forgiveness, because obviously you did I don't know if you're still paying off your student loan or if you've paid it off now because it was so cheap when long time ago you did your medical school. But now we're paying £9,250 a year and the debt accumulates very quickly.
Listen, I mean, it was a while ago, right? These lights are smoothing out my wrinkles nicely here, so don't be spilling my secrets. But yeah, it was a while ago since I had student loan debt, and it was terrible. But it's gotten even more terrible. So let's just get straight into it, because this is quite an interesting proposal from some leading economists under the guise of something called the Nuffield Trust. So they released this document, which I'll put in the links, which basically says there's a proposal to forgive or waive student loan debt in return for years of service. And this is something that I've been wondering about for years, but no one's talked about, because I know that in America, they have something called PSLF, or Public Service Loan Forgiveness, whereby doctors and other healthcare professionals have their sizable student loans waived in return for ongoing service in the public sector, as per the name. But no one really talking about it much in this country. And so this proposal from the Nuffield Trust is pretty interesting. And as I say, basically, the idea is that you build up a massive student loan learning to be a doctor or other healthcare professional, then that loan would be progressively written off depending on how many years of service that you do. And the Royal College of Nursing did some modelling via London School of Economics, and they basically proposed that 30% of your loan would be written off after 3 years of service. Presumably that just means service in the NHS. 70% after 7 years, and 100% of the loan written off after 10 years. And they worked out that would cost about £230 million for nurses and other healthcare professionals, and an additional £170 million for doctors and dentists. And basically, the thinking here is that we have a huge recruitment and retention problem in the NHS across all specialties and professions. Apparently, a third of UK medical students planning to emigrate. Don't blame them, to be honest. They probably got sick of seeing screenshots of people's Australian payslips on Twitter. For every 2 GP training places filled, only one of those GPs actually goes on to become a full-time GP. So it's a tremendous dropout rate. And about 3 in 5 doctors that are in core training remain in an NHS hospital 8 years later, and half of them leave in the first 2 years. So these highly trained healthcare professionals are giving up on the NHS and leaving. And the plan is that if there was an incentive, i.e. forgiving some of their student loan, that would incentivize those people to not leave. I know we've both got some pretty strong thoughts about this, but before we get into those strong thoughts, would it be helpful if you gave us a summary of student loans? Because back in the day, when I was there was just a Plan 1 student loan, and that was it. That's how old I am. So I had a Plan 1 student loan, and that would be regarded as good debt. It was reasonable interest rates, reasonable return. I had a massive debt, but to your point, I did repay it. I just repaid it at the minimum amount. I didn't make any overpayments. We'll talk about overpayments in a minute, but I did repay it. And now I look at, if I was going to medical school now, there's absolutely no way I would repay my student loan. And you might think, oh, you're not going to repay it, it's not a problem. But as we're going to see, student loans have gotten hideously expensive, especially for those of us on longer degrees like doctors. Give us your summarize student loans in 3 sentences. No problem, right? Super easy.
We shouldn't have... No, I'm kidding. Okay, so you were on Plan 1, you said. How much was your annual tuition fees? Do you mind me asking?
I got a bursary because it was means tested. So because I came from basically a normal family, but let's just say a poor family. But yeah, I didn't have to pay any fees, and I did a fast track 4-year course. So I didn't pay any fees, but I think my overall student loan, so I had 85 grand of debt at the end. And the breakdown was about 50 on student loan, about 30 on a postgraduate professional studies loan, which was like a loan. They didn't do them anymore, but a loan at the bank. I owed my mum 5 grand. I had 5 or 10 grand on a credit card as well. So that was basically where I was. But the interest rate that I paid, the average over, I think it took me about 8 or 10 years to pay off my loan, student loan that is. I think my average interest rate was about 1.1%. It was basically inflation. So it was almost free money.
So basically bursaries have been scrapped. They were scrapped a few years ago, so everybody has to get a loan. There are some bursaries, but you have to apply for them. In terms of mean tested, all of it is loan. So actually the student loan is the most detrimental to the least affluent members of society because they end up leaving with the most amount of debt. So on top of that, as soon as you take out that student loan, i.e. from your first year of study, that's when it starts accruing interest. So it's still accruing, it's just sitting there accruing interest whilst you're studying, and then it's continuously accruing interest after that when you graduate. When you graduate, depending on what plan you're on, based on a threshold, which are very similar between the three, you start paying the student loan back at a rate of 9%. The student loan is calculated on your gross pay, so this is everything before any deductions, but it's paid out of net pay. So it's not actually even tax efficient. It's quite punitive, I'd say, in both states in that way, because you're actually paying it on the full amount that you've earned, and it's on all locum pay as well. It's not just, it's all income, including your interest, dividends, savings, all of those things. The Plan 1 and Plan 2, they were 30 years long, so they are wiped after 30 years or when you die. Whereas Plan 5, which is the newest one, it started from September 2023, and that one is a 40-year long one, and the threshold is slightly lower as well. So people will be paying from much earlier, so from £25,000, they'll be paying 9% over that back, and they'll be paying it for 40 years instead of 30 years, or until they die. So it's actually getting more and more expensive to study at university, because what happens is but the interest is accruing at such a high rate. So the latest one, if I tell you, for Plan 2s was 7.5%. That's at what rate the debt was increasing every single year. I'm not going to, whatever overpayment I make, that interest rate is going to outstrip me. So I'm not going to be able to catch up with that, which is, we're going to talk about how we feel about overpayments. I think we're both on the same page of that, which is because of the way the doctor salary works, it's quite stagnant. It doesn't go up in the same exponential way it does in the private sector. So it doesn't make sense for us to do overpayments and try and pay it off early, because we're never going to meet that same, we're never going to be able to match up with the way the interest rate is growing.
Yeah, absolutely. So the key points here is that student loan debt is not like other debts, and the size of your debt has zero effect on your repayments, and your repayments are just controlled, as in how much you pay is controlled by your salary basically, and you explained that really clearly. So I think that's a key thing, that the size of the debt doesn't affect how much you pay, which you might think is a good thing, but actually because of the way that our careers work as doctors, essentially we start on pretty modest income and we stay at that amount for a long time. During that time, the interest rate of, what did you say, 7.5% at current times?
7.5% at the moment.
Yeah, that's just ramping up the size of the debt, okay? And then eventually you may, if you're lucky, end up earning a reasonable amount. But by that time, as you said, the debt has grown so large that you will never repay it, but you're now paying 9% above the repayment threshold, which is like 27,295 or around that, slightly different Plan 4, I think. But you're paying 9% above £27,295 on a larger amount. So some medical students could end up paying double or more the amount that they borrowed because of this way that career structure is done. And I think that key point is that overpayments, you would think if it was like a normal loan, if you made an overpayment, that would be a great thing. Like it would reduce the size of the debt. But because of the way that the loan works, that is that after 30 years or 40 years, I can't believe it's 40 years, it's crazy. After 40 years, the loan is written off. In some situations, making extra repayments on the loan can actually mean that you end up paying more, right? And I've actually got a little nifty worked example here, okay? Let's just say that you are a medical student and you have a Plan 2 loan, which I know is no longer possible, but you graduate with £75,000 worth of debt, okay? Let's just imagine in the first year, you make £1,000 a month overpayments, okay? Just for the first year. So if you did nothing with that debt of £75,000, ultimately you would pay around £116,000, okay? And there's so many variables here that don't take that number as gospel. I'm just using it as an example, okay, of one situation. So you do nothing, you pay £116,000, okay? If you pay £1,000 extra a month for the first year only, the total amount you repay is £128,000. And you're like, what? How can making overpayments of £1,000 a month for 1 year end up costing you more overall? And the reason is because if you're not gonna ever repay that amount and it'll be written off after 30 years, then making repayments makes absolutely no sense. So that's just something to flag up, because I think you mentioned that on Martin Lewis' site. Martin Lewis, got a lot of respect for him, doing a lot of great work. But I think some of the advice there is not really targeted towards medical students and potentially misleading. Tell us about that.
So basically, Martin Lewis's website says that if you're going to start earning 30,000 when you graduate, then it's worth actually doing overpayments. However, I think that takes into account the private sector, where people's pay tends to go up quite significantly year on year. So I think it would make sense that you would do the overpayments then, because your pay is going to go up quite significantly compared to that of a doctor. Whereas we stay very much within 2-3 grand each pay point. It's not really that significant the way our pay works. So for the first, until we're about junior registrars, we're still on quite a modest pay. So for the first few years, we're not going to be paying the same amount someone in the private sector will be. So I don't think it's actually worth us making those overpayments early, because we actually need that money, A, in the bank now. And secondly, the debt is accruing that much interest that whatever modest overpayments we start making in the early stages is not going to meet what we need towards the end. Whereas actually someone who's making, say, within the first 5 years, they go from 30 grand to 60 grand, which isn't going to happen to us. It does make sense for them to make that overpayment.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're saying, oh, we think it doesn't, when Syra says that, of course, she's an accountant. So we've got a giant spreadsheet. We've crunched loads of scenarios here. And in the majority of cases for doctors, overpaying makes no sense. And you should just consider your student loan as a 9% graduate tax on any earnings over £27,295. And that is a huge amount of money, and if you don't have a student loan, yeah, like me, because I've paid mine off, or you were lucky enough to not have one before, just imagine if someone started taking 9% of all your earnings over £27,295 for the next 40 years, because that is what today's medical students and doctors are facing. So it's really important. I'm not trying to start a generational war here, but I think it's really important that the older generations appreciate that the game has massively changed here. And this is a massive cost and a huge opportunity cost as well, because I remember when I had my student loan and I was investing as well, and I was just looking at my student loan repayments and then compounding that, imagining I invested it and compounded it 8%. And I was just like, oh my goodness, this opportunity cost is absolutely massive. So yeah, I think it's it's not good. So let's just talk about this. Anything else we need to say about student loan structure, etc.? Have we made that clear, do you think?
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to point out is actually, if it's possible to take as little loan as possible, I would. When I went to uni, I went to a uni with a lot of people whose families could afford to help them out. However, they decided to take the student loan because then they'd have some spare cash in their pocket, and they just thought free money at that stage, because you've got 18-year-olds making daft decisions, right? So, if possible, living at home versus living away, you'd save that much money. You'd be able to not have to take out the loan in the first place. That's probably the easiest thing to do. And I know it's really hard for a lot of people, but that's better than overpaying. So if you graduate and someone says, oh, you've got this inheritance now. Some people have even said to me, should I just put that inheritance in student loan? I don't know about you, Tommy, but I'm like, absolutely not. use that to buy a house personally. But what do you think?
Oh, it's difficult. I'm hoping to be conflicted here, because one of my personal financial goals is that should my children decide that they want to go to university, I'm hoping to support them with the cost, because I got no support, which is fine, is what it is. And those debts were absolutely savage. I can't even think about the opportunity cost debts had. Yeah, if I got like a massive windfall, would I overpay it? I'd have to crunch the numbers, to be honest, because I think my general kind of philosophy of basically overpay debt or invest is, if it's like a debt with an interest rate of 19%, you're not going to make 19% guaranteed on any investment. You're just not. So overpaying, that would make sense to over repay. If it's like a debt with an interest rate of 2%, I've been averaging 8.5% on my investments for the last 15 years by doing literally nothing. You might be more tempted to invest. And in fact, that's like the decision that I had when I finished, because I could have overpaid my student loan and paid it off faster, but the interest rate was 1.1%. And I'm like, 1.1% like guaranteed versus 6 to 8% average in the stock market. Not advice, do your own research. And I chose to invest. So I don't know, it's tricky. Yeah, it has to depend on your personal circumstances. But yeah, I think we've got to just remember that if you are going to do an overpayment, really make sure you've run your numbers, because it could literally end up costing you more. But if the fairy godmother swooped down and said to me, Tommy, I'm going to pay off your £85,000 of student loan debt, yeah, I think even though the numbers might not make sense, I probably would do it. And to your point, if you can minimize the debt while you're there, that is a very solid strategy.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say on student loans.
Okay. Yeah. So let's just think about this proposal then to basically student loan forgiveness if you continue to work in the NHS. In some ways, it just seems like an absolute no-brainer. And I actually asked, before they became Doctors Vote, or while they were Doctors Vote, Emma Runswick and Vivek Trivedi came on the Medics Money podcast ages ago. And and we were talking about pay, and I said to them, like, why are you not broadening out the discussion and talking about something like student loan forgiveness, which would be a massive financial benefit? And they said that they just wanted to focus in on pay and not let the waters get muddied by other things like this. And actually, tactically, I think that was really astute, and I completely understand why they did that. Actually, that podcast ended up making the basis of a Daily Mail article where they were saying, I think it was like left-wing faction takes over the BMA. And it was just a recital of our podcast. Yeah, any Daily Mail journalists listening? Hiya. Maybe if you could just tune out. Yeah, wow. Imagine one of your children or hypothetical children came home and said, oh, Syra, great news. I've become a journalist. You'd be like, oh, amazing journalist. What an amazing occupation, a noble occupation. Who are you working for? Daily Mail, Dad. You'd just be like, oh, really?
And no, that's one of my, I've got a list, and that's one of my no lists. I'm sorry.
Anyway, hopefully they've tuned out now. So, yeah. Do you think it's a good idea? I've got a problem with this. And that is that how this would pan out, I reckon, is that it would basically incentivize people who have a lot of student loan debt to work in the unpopular areas, right? So what would happen is that working class people like me with chips on their shoulder would end up working in the less popular areas, because that would be the areas that, I think that's how it works in America with the public service loan forgiveness. And I think this would be the same. If you can't get doctors to work in an area, obvious thing to do is offer student loan forgiveness. And then suddenly anyone who's flat broke and desperate like I was would be drawn to that area. And that's making a two-tier system. But then, to your point about arguing with yourself about this, I was thinking, actually, that already exists, because as soon as I left medical school, my number one priority was to move to a low cost of living area. So I might have wanted to work in Birmingham, where I trained. I might have wanted to work in London. But actually, because I was so broke, I just had to move to a low cost of living area. And I was earning the same or very similar to those in London, but my cost of living was probably half. And that's how I smashed out all my debts, started investing, and bam, like, the rest is history. So there is already a two-tier thing. So I'm arguing with myself. I can't decide, but I'm a bit worried that it might end up with, it might make it a two-tier system, even more of a two-tier system for those from normal backgrounds.
I don't think student loan is what's making people leave. So if the other things don't change, if the working conditions don't change, if the poor pay doesn't change, if the culture doesn't change, people are still going to want to leave. You can't really say they're going to grind their teeth and just carry on with it for 10 years because their student loan is going to be wiped. About going abroad, you still have to pay your student loan back anyway, so it's not like running away from the NHS stops you paying your student loan. So I think offering a student loan forgiveness would be, on one hand, great. And actually, personally, if I was thinking about it, I would stay in the NHS a little bit longer just to take advantage of it, because my student loans are really high, because I ended up maximizing it through both of my degrees. Whereas, say, someone who was more affluent, who had more help, who didn't get the whole loan, almost they're incentivized to seek out something better. They're incentivized to, because for them, their loan's just not as high. So I almost feel like it's, like I said, the whole student loan system is detrimental to those from less affluent backgrounds. But I feel like the student loan forgiveness system would also be detrimental to those from less affluent backgrounds, because they'd be stuck in a situation where their working conditions are really poor, but it's almost influencing their decision to continue in that environment, for me.
Yeah. No, 100%. I think you're right there. Absolutely. I think the other thing as well is like the BMA's point. This shouldn't be used to water down any pay restoration. This should be it as well as something like that as well. I guess as well, I've come at it from the working class kid with a chip on his shoulder angle. Now, most likely, I hope to pay for my children if they choose to go to extra study. Then I'll be like, what's actually the point in me paying if they could just get their student loan written off? So it's not equitable the other way around as well. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's like a really interesting proposal. If you're watching on YouTube, just let us know in the comments. What do you think about this? Because, yeah, I think me and Syra can't decide. If you had to vote yes or no, what would you vote?
I'd vote yes, just because they're not doing anything else to try and improve things for us. Anything to try and make it a little bit better, I'm going to say yes to. Yeah, that's my take on it.
Yeah, I would also vote yes. I would have 100% gone for this. Absolutely. No brainer. And also, if you work out the opportunity cost of those overpayments, so you've got the money that you're paying to the student loan, but if you, instead of having to pay that to the student loans company, imagine you bought a house, which may appreciate in value. Imagine you put it in a stocks and shares ISA, which may appreciate in value. To Syra's point, the opportunity cost of these student loan payments is absolutely massive. And like you said earlier, that first part of your career is where the money is most tight. You've got exams, you've got rent, you've got parking charges at the hospital, all kinds of nonsense that you have to pay for. So a little boost then would be much welcome. So I'd also vote yes. But watching on YouTube, let us know in the comments. Love to get your feedback. I'm sure there's strong views either way. I'll also link to the original paper, which was from the Nuffield Trust. Interesting. There's some more detail in there. Syra, that was awesome. Thank you so much. I think you're also you've written an awesome student loan guide for that'll be coming around on the email soon, I'm guessing.
Yeah, should I tell you a little bit about it? Yeah, it's called The Comprehensive Guide to Student Loans for Everybody. So it starts from information that will be useful for people whose children are planning to go to medical school, all the way to people who graduated on Plan 1. So it encompasses all that information from several different sources and brings it all into one place. So it can help intergenerational doctors understand the position that each other are going to be in. But it also gives you worked examples of what your repayments would look like if you had different scenarios. So you and I both did graduate entry medicine courses, but it was different at the time because I got access to a graduate entry medicine course student loan, whereas you probably didn't, and you had that postgraduate thing that you were talking about that doesn't exist anymore. So all of those things mean we all pay different amounts. And so there's worked examples of how that would all look, because one of the things that we found out the hard way is that, so my partner, he did his undergrad on Plan 1 and he did his graduate entry on Plan 2. And because of the way the threshold works and the fact that they're two different plans, he has to pay them off simultaneously. So it's not one after the other. Whereas for me, I pay them off one after the other because they're both on Plan 2. So if you've got a child or a relative who's going to be going to medical school after doing a degree, they'll have been on Plan 2 and then they're going to be starting on Plan 5. So that's going to be even worse. So there's a worked example in there explaining exactly what that would look like, and it might help with some decision making.
That sounds awesome. So that's part of your work with what medical school doesn't teach us, which is our podcast and resources specifically for medical students. But if you want to get first access to this, jump on our email list. I think there's 53,000 people on our email list now. Just go to medicsmoney.co.uk/join and we'll send it around on email. That sounds super useful. You also put loads of stuff on Instagram, don't you, Syra, at the Finance Medic?
Yep, at the Finance Medic is mine. So mine's got all sorts of stuff for everybody. And then the at WMSDTU is the medical school specific one that's done by Medics Money.
Awesome. And there's also a Medics Money Instagram. And if you've got this far in the podcast or YouTube and you want more of this, hit the like button. Don't forget the subscribe button. Leave a comment. Let us know what you think. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for listening. Look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
Thanks for having me.